Could I have a moment with Delilah? He asked sincerely. Delilah glanced at her parents, who looked surprised at the request. Please! He added with slight hesitation. Her parents looked at her for an answer. Delilah looked back at Alistair's face curiously. His face held no expression she recognized. She slowly nodded once, and her mother clasped her hand for another moment before leaving with her husband and the doctor. Once they had left, the doctor closing the door with a soft click, Alistair leaned forward slightly, smiling at Delilah like she was some sort of elegant flower, because you smile at flowers all the time. Delilah once again felt like she was being x-rayed, only without the threat of cancer. But it's still probably just as toxic, Alistair asked, looking anxiously at her. Delilah looked down at herself, the hospital gown, the IV sticking in her arm, the sling holding her broken arm, which I like to imagine is her left arm. She registered the padding underneath, supporting her broken ribs. She frowned at him and didn't answer. He got the gist, however. That bad, huh? He stated softly, leaning forward to push a lock of hair out of her face. His hand was warm. The smell of vanilla hung in the air, its scent permeating her muddled mind, rejuvenating her. She inhaled deeply, savoring the scent that seemed like the breath of life. His hand withdrew sooner than she would have liked. Alistair sat down, letting out a soft groan. He looked absolutely worn out. He leaned his head back and inhaled silently, his shoulders loosening slightly. How have you been? Delilah asked, watching his figure slumped in the chair. He didn't answer immediately. She opened her mouth to ask again when he spoke. I've been okay, he answered, his voice raspy. He sat up straight, turning to look at her again. Delilah noticed that his face looked different. Dark lines hung under his eyes, which looked bloodshot, even from this distance. You look like you could use some sleep, Delilah said. Alistair smiled weakly, a small smile creasing his face. Over the past 2 weeks, I've only gotten... His eyes tilted upward, his mouth moving silently counting 30 hours of sleep, he finally said, looking surprised at the number himself. Delilah stared at him, her mouth subconsciously sliding open slightly in awe. Realizing that her mouth was open, she closed it. Hey, she's got control of her mouth again. Alistair chuckled softly at her reaction. Why have you only had 30 hours of sleep over the past 2 weeks? I get about the same because I stay up all late all that time trying to finish up my homework, and then I have to go to school the next day and do more homework. Delilah asked, puzzled that someone could talk to her, let alone come to see her. Wow. It seems like no one ever comes to talk to Delilah, despite the fact she had 2 worried parents. Where was her brother? Alistair's face fell, and he looked anxious again. I've been worried sick about you. The doctor said you had a 23% chance of making it out of the coma. 14% that you would make it out without severe or permanent brain damage. I thought you would die. The doctor said there was like a 5% chance of that. But we always know that statistics are just lies. His voice trailed away, cracking slightly at the end. I had to come see you, to do something to give you a fighting chance. He absently flexed his left hand, which was currently sitting in his lap. Delilah flushed slightly at these words, wishing Alistair would look somewhere else other than her face. I must look like a real mess. Her mind's eye replayed the feeling of isolation and weakness she had felt the moments before, the memory of something cold, hard, and smooth touching her head, the pulsing warmth moments later, the light seeping through the tears. What would you do to help me wake up, I mean? Alistair didn't answer, but stood up and walked over to the door. Opening it, he spoke to the 3 standing outside. I'm done talking to her. You can come back inside. Dr. Polanski, let us discuss finances. Alistair stood aside to let Mr. and Mrs. Roanhart in, then closed the door, and began speaking animatedly with Polanski. I like to imagine he's talking with his hands, doing a lot of motions. Delilah sighed, feeling restless and tired all the same. Her parents looked anxious and upset. They both were looking into space, hands clasped together. Delilah looked through the glass at the 2 standing outside. Polanski had a clipboard in his hand, reading something off to Alistair. Alistair responded with a determined tone. The doctor's eyes widened and glanced inside before answering, his expression shocked. Alistair calmly replied. Dr. Polanski looked ecstatic and impressed, shaking Alistair's gloved hand with both of his own. With that, Dr. Polanski left. Alistair opened the door again and came in to stand next to Delilah's parents. He began speaking to them in a quiet voice. Dr. Polanski has been telling me about the hospital expenses. Delilah will have to stay here for another month before being able to go home. She needs more recovery before the physicians are willing to risk her leaving. Her arm will take another 3 weeks to properly heal. Likewise, her ribs will probably need another 2 weeks to repair sufficiently before she can even attempt to walk around the ward. His voice was crisp, but reassuring. That's good to hear, but... Her mother spoke, her voice shaking slightly with anxiety again. What's this going to cost us?
Absolutely nothing, Alistair countered. I'm paying for everything. Screw the rules, I have money.
The silence inside the room startled Delilah so much that she wondered if her parents had fainted from shock. Looking over, she surmised that she was half right. Mrs. Roanhart looked like she couldn't breathe, struggling very hard to find her voice. Mr. Roanhart, however, looked appalled.
We can't let you do that. This isn't your fault. We have to find some way to pay. I insist, Alistair said, coolly cutting through Delilah's father's voice. Delilah means a lot to you, and, as I said before, I am here to help. I guess I didn't say that before, but hey, I'm still here to help.
Alistair took a softball-sized pouch from his belt and held it to her parents, the contents jingling slightly. Mr. Roanhart held out a hand, and Alistair placed the bag in his upright hand.
I've already made the arrangements with Dr. Polanski. This will cover all the expenses you owe.
The look on Mr. Roanhart's face made it clear he doubted that this would pay for all of the hospital's bills. But Delilah's mother looked grateful.
How can we ever repay you, mister?
She asked, her hand shaking slightly as she grasped Alistair's. Alistair didn't answer, but stood up once again and headed for the door. Looking back, he caught Delilah's gaze.
Your debt to me has already been paid in full. And by the way, I meant to say you are debt to me. Not you're as in the contraction you are going to be.
Giving a shadow of a wink to Delilah, Alistair left the room, closing the door with a soft snap.
So I guess I'm not going to be able to go to the movie tonight, huh?
End of chapter 3.